Anyone who's watched our podcast and weekly updates and all of the information that we put out probably knows Eugene Garvin. But for anyone who hasn't watched that, Eugene is a retired R&D director in engineering. He's a researcher for the Natural Women's Council and all of the groups that we align with: Parents' Rights Alliance, Irish Education Alliance, Lawyers for Justice Ireland, Catholic Secondary School Parents Association, and any other group that needs information. He's so quick to get it and to research it. So he does all of the reading. Every paper that's been out there, every book, every article, every documentary, he just reads and reads and then puts it in a package for all of us to make sense of what doesn't make sense. So we are absolutely grateful for Eugene, who should be enjoying his retirement. Instead, he's researching this to help save our children's education. So we're really, really grateful. And he's going to talk about the corruption of education. And then we have tea, coffee, and a nice 30-minute break to get some air.
Hi, thanks everybody. And first thing I want to say to you is well done for being here today. Sincerely, thank you for being here because it's so important. So I've got a lot to cover and I've only got 25 minutes to cover it. So I'm going to go through pretty quickly. We will have a downloadable PDF with the backup documentation on this. So I'm going to skip through things really fast and some things might go right over your head. So don't be worried about that because I'm going to be going down very, very deep here. This is going to be a roller coaster, okay? So let's kick off. So warning signs. I got on this journey about 3 years ago, and it was in response to some of the warning signs I'm going to talk to you here. And these are warning signs that I saw, and I said, there's something going on here, and I'm not comfortable with it. And it really upset me at the time when I saw the nature of some of the material going into the schools, because I'd looked at what was happening in the USA and in the UK, and I said, oh my God, it's coming to Ireland, and it has come. So let's start. So there was a committee, an opening statement by Dr. Aoife Neary. Some of you may know Dr. Aoife Neary back in 2018. She talked about looking at sexuality as isolated, individualized, towards a critical consideration of sexuality as intersectional and caught up in broader power relations. That's the language of Marxism. That's the language of Marxism, of communism. That's not language that people normally use. It's academic language. So once I saw that, I said, there's something going on here, definitely. So we move on and move from the overemphasis on risk. So we're going to get rid of safeguarding, right? This is what she's saying, basically, in that statement. So let me go back, the last one. Secondly, I propose that children and young people are heavily involved in the co-construction or co-production. And this is kind of a theme, and I'll talk about it later on in the presentation. So let's go on. So she talks about fears regarding childhood innocence. Okay, again, concerns, alarm bells. And as young as 3. So that's why they're bringing it in for the 3-year-olds. That's why they're bringing this stuff into the Ashler program and into primary education. And then she wants to get rid of any opt-outs or anything related to ethos. Okay, so we'll see where this all comes from. And then she talks about this whole school thing. The whole school approach you'll see as a theme in my presentation. It's indoctrination, basically. It's contaminating every single subject, everything that's going on in the schoolroom with this indoctrination material. And it's not just the sex and gender stuff. There's more coming. There's more coming. So I'm going to talk about what's coming. I saw this document, and we have a copy of it over there on the table. It's the Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe from the WHO. And when I saw this document, I was horrified. I was absolutely horrified that nobody was talking about it. It's outrageous. Now, we did a lot of research. We did detailed videos on this document, and it's based on the notion that children are sexual from birth, so young children need to be learning about their sexual identity and pleasuring themselves at an early age. That's what this is all about. It's outrageous, right? Then there was this. This is an RT talking about the United Nations putting the pressure on Ireland to bring in comprehensive sexuality education. Now, I knew what that meant, and I wasn't pleased when I saw it. And at all levels, right, down to the young kids as well. They're after the little ones. And then they talk about gender equality and sexual diversity. At the time, I didn't appreciate what that term gender equality meant, but I do now, and you'll see in a minute what it means. And then again, they talk about later on about the barriers in case there's any sort of opt-outs or ethos or anything like that. This is outrageous. These people want to undermine parental rights, basically, with your children. That's what they're doing. So here's the definition from UNESCO, United Nations, UNESCO, their education group. Definition of gender. It's the social construction of gender. It's a feminist theory definition of gender, a queer theory definition of gender. It's not biologically predetermined, nor is it fixed forever. The language is the language of feminist theory, if you've ever read feminist theory, which is garbage. But that's what it is. This is activist language, and it's there coming from UNESCO. And of course, Ireland will do everything that UNESCO tell us to do, everything the United Nations will tell us to do. So once you see that, you know what you're going to get in the education system. So what's this all about? These are trans rights marches in Belfast and in Dublin. What are the communist flags appearing in these marches and pictures of Lenin appearing in these things? It's Marxism, it's communism. You'll find people from the Forza trade union at these marches with their signs up. Forza trade unions are the people who look after the libraries. So no surprise, the libraries, you're never going to make any success in the libraries because the trade unionists were going to support them, right? Okay, so you need to know this. So I'm going to talk about a couple of philosophical things first, which will kind of come up as we go through it, right? So Nietzsche. So Nietzsche is one of these French philosophers, and he talks about moral relativism, and there's no objective truth. You know, what is truth but a lie agreed upon? See this? And of course, when there's no truth, there's no right, there's no wrong. You know, and that's a dangerous philosophy, and everything is driven by the will to power. And communists and Marxists are driven by the will to power. Okay? So hold that thought because it'll come up later. And here's another man, Jean-Paul Sartre, and this is the whole thing of atheistic existentialism. And he talks about existence preceding and rules essence. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. So basically, the child in the womb is a nothing. Okay, so you can see where the whole issue of abortion comes from. It's no problem to people like him because the child in the womb is nothing. And even a young child is nothing because they haven't developed an essence yet. So this stuff is grounded in philosophy. This is atheistic philosophy. And most communists buy into this. Okay? Karl Marx. Thus heaven I forfeited, I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. He wrote a lot of poetry, actually. And you'll get this up on the Marxist.org website. Or there's a whole website that's got all the Marxist leaders from the past and all the writings of Karl Marx, etc. And this is up there. This was a very dark man. A very dark man. So anybody following this ethos, and fundamentally, communism and Marxism is anti-Christian. They fundamentally want to get rid of Christianity. They're anti-God. That's the basis of what they do. They're not neutral. You know, people would say, you know, I've got some friends who don't believe, right? But they're not anti-God. They're not anti-Christian. They just don't believe, and that's fine. But these people, these are anti-God, anti-Christian. They want to get rid of you if you're a Christian. Okay. So postmodern critical theory, let's talk about it, dismantling Western society. And it is dismantling Western society. I think we all can agree to that. We can see what's happening, right? So this is a book here, at the forward to this book. Karl Marx wrote this forward. It's a book by Wilhelm Reich, who was a member of the Frankfurt School. I'll talk about them in a minute. The Sexual Revolution. And he's talking about the uncompromising critical evaluation of all that exists. So we're going to start talking about critical theory now, okay? So there's a video here, so we'll play it. Hopefully the volume is good enough.
The most fascinating and frustrating thing about cultural Marxism is that people don't even know what it is. And a lot of people that are pursuing those ends have no idea of it. So if you go up to somebody and say, you know, this is really a kind of a Marcusean, Antonio Gramsci, Wilhelm Reich, sexual revolution, Frankfurt School, kind of cultural Marxist thing you're doing here, they'll look at you like you're out of your mind. Cultural Marxism today is more often referred to as critical theory. And there are many colleges in America that have critical theory programs and departments. In fact, our president of fundamental transformation, Barack Obama, went to Occidental College, which has a department of critical theory and social justice. Queer theory, phrase that they use, all of this which falls under the umbrella of critical theory. In a way, I like the phrase critical theory better than cultural Marxism, because really what they're doing is criticizing everything. And everything that at least heretofore existed as what we understood in the Judeo-Christian West as a moral absolute. And what they really mean by critical in terms of critical theory is destroying. So not even just criticizing it, but redefining it, taking it down, destroying it, deconstructing it, taking it apart. They took classical Marxism, which under Marx and Engels was an economic model. The cultural Marxists took all of this and looked at it not through the prism of economics and class, but through culture and sex in particular. They established, of all things, a form of Freudian Marxism. Culture would be the goal. Culture, culture, culture. Sex, sex, sex. Education, education, education. For them, their world could be the university classroom. That's where the cultural revolution could and would take place.
Yep. That's where it is taking place. It's already taken place in our university classrooms. Our universities are infested with this stuff, unfortunately. So let's go through. So on the left-hand side, I've got the Frankfurt School, the Institute of Social Research, as they were called in Frankfurt. They're all Marxists. And they had this critical theory. And you marry that with postmodernism, and you get what we call critical social justice. And another name for that is woke. And under that, you've got these theories like feminist theory, queer theory. And if you look at the academics who worked on the SPHE course for the junior cycle, they would have all been involved in feminist theory and queer theory. And you can see it in their papers. It's rancid. It's rancid with the language of Marxism is in it. You can see it. The other theories, let me go back here for a minute. Queer theory, we talked about women's studies, critical race theory you're familiar about. It's basically applying critical theory to a whole spectrum of cultural aspects. And I call it activist scholarship because that's what it's all about. It's about inspiring activism in universities, and now they want to bring it into the schools, and now they want to bring it down to 3-year-olds. It's unreal, it really is. So this is what's going on. Now, if you look at cultural Marxism on Wikipedia, you'll see it's a far-right conspiracy theory. And there's actually, and we've just gone through a list of items that you could classify as cultural Marxism that dominate our university. So this is a deliberate misrepresentation. 90% of Wikipedia is probably okay, 9% is dodgy, and 1% is out to lunch, and this is one of them. They have activists basically working in Wikipedia. And there's people who have actually, will admit to that they've been activists. They bring, always putting up a leftist view. So this is very important. The critical Marxist turn in education, which took place about 40 years ago. It's basically when educational scholarship, that scholarship related to teaching, became fundamentally Marxist. And this term, you can see the term social justice there, and they talk about the word critical itself. So when you hear the term critical thinking now in an Irish, talking about a curriculum, they're not talking about critical thinking, they're talking about critical theory, the critical pedagogy. It's this Marxist-based critical thinking they're talking about, right? And it dominates educational scholarship now, unfortunately. So if they talk about we're bringing in based on the latest research, in university, it's based on this stuff. It's based on queer theory. It's based on critical theory. That's the problem. That's why it's so toxic. There's no surprise because you know where it's coming from. So let's move on. So pedagogy. So people might know the term pedagogy. It's the way of teaching. So there's a thing called critical pedagogy, which is a philosophy of teaching based on critical theory or critical Marxism, okay? You can see it there. It says that issues of social justice and democracy are not distinct from acts of teaching and learning. They're basically politicizing the classroom. That's what they're saying. You cannot separate politics from teaching and learning. The trouble is when you bring this in, the learning goes out the door. You can't have both. So this is the problem. And there's another thing called queer pedagogy, which you may not be familiar with, which is applying the concept of critical pedagogy and queer theory. So you're focused on gender and sex and the oppositional position to normalcy. So these people aren't tolerant. They talk about inclusive. It's not inclusive, it's replacement. They want to replace what you have. They want to replace your beliefs. They don't want to include them. So this is the issue, right? So we'll move on. And that pedagogical approach has a huge bearing. So you could teach English through the way I learned English. I just learned English. I went to a Catholic school, but there was nothing special about the English in Catholic school. It was just English. But now your books in English books are going to be contaminated with queer theory, social justice, sustainable development. Like that's what you get all over your English books. That's what's coming. And we have examples over there. So Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator, he's the guy who kind of started the whole critical pedagogy thing. And this slide comes from the the SPHE course in DCU that Mary Creedon attended, right? And there was a module presented by a guy called Dr. Jones Irwin, who we'll talk about a little bit later on, in transformative leadership. And they use this term. So if you hear this term transformative leadership, it means they're going to be bringing in critical pedagogy, critical theory. And here, they can hide it. So you won't see terms like queer theory on a school curriculum, but you will see things like transformative education, holistic education, inclusive education. You'll see those terms in the curriculum. So it's kind of hidden from you. You don't quite know what's there. And you can see critical literacy. So that's basically looking at literacy through a Marxist lens. That's coming into the senior cycle in a couple of years. They've already got the curriculum is out. So you can see what's happening. So here we have Paulo Freire on the left here, and some of the issues, the concerns. The emphasis on critical consciousness and social transformation will overlook the importance of foundational skills and knowledge acquisition. It just replaces it, because the whole thing becomes all about being an activist, being an active citizen. And you'll see that language in the primary curriculum. And it involves this thing about power and privilege and social justice issues. Imagine bringing that into a 4 or 5-year-old, start talking about social justice. God help us, just leave the child alone. Let them go and develop normally and don't bring this stuff in. It's going to destroy learning. And then this comes from ChatGPT actually, and I'm glad they say it, the risk of using it for ideological indoctrination or political activism in the classroom. And that's exactly what's been done here. So where is some of this coming from? So the people putting the lighter fuel, I would say, on the fire right now are these guys. A number of billionaires, some of whom are communists, but they're communists in one way. They want communism for all of you, but not for them. They're going to be the stakeholders, the leaders, the people who are going to run the society. And Eddie's going to talk about it, and Emmett later on in terms of... So these guys, they're causing a lot of trouble right now because they're fundamentally funding a lot of activism, and we've seen that. And they also have huge influence. So for every dollar one of these guys puts in, they can probably leverage another $10 of government funding because they fund the Democratic Party, for example. George Soros is the biggest funder of the Democratic Party. So you've seen all the USAID stuff, right? And that's rampant in Europe because fundamentally the EU is communist. Fundamentally, the United Nations, they're full of communists in those organizations. And they're funding all this garbage in the NGOs, through the NGO sector. And we have it in Ireland. Over 6 billion on NGOs in Ireland, and most of those are on the left. So this is from David Rockefeller, from his memoirs, right? Some even believe that we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the US, conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political economic structure, one world, if you will. And he is. I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. He admits to it in his memoirs. And that's the whole Rockefeller family. They donated the land that the United Nations sit on in New York. They were part of founding the United Nations. The goal of the United Nations was one world order. A communist, globalist, one world order. That's what they wanted. Obviously, where these guys would be the elites at the top. And that's still their goal. And there's lots of other people who believe the same thing. So you see this billionaire club in bid to curb world overpopulation. The other thing that a lot of those people on that slide think that there's too many people on the planet. So we've got to do things to reduce population. So they had this meeting in 2009. It was reported in the mainstream media. You won't see this reported in the mainstream media today because it'll be covered up. But at the time, they called themselves the Good Club. And there was Bill Gates, George Soros, David Rockefeller. Now, it wasn't only white men. There was women there as well. Oprah Winfrey was there at this meeting. And what were they talking about? They were talking about to overcome political and religious obstacles to change. That population growth would be tackled as a potentially disastrous environmental, social and industrial threat. Okay, so so things have been happening since this meeting. So this is a graph of various terminology, and I'll direct you to the one in the bottom right-hand corner. It was done by a data scientist, I think he's in New Zealand, and from 4 of the main papers in the US. And the red line is the Good Club meeting, the red bar is the Obama administration. And you can see the term transphobia and transphobic didn't exist. It didn't exist prior to 2010, and all of a sudden it's going through the roof. This was fabricated. It's a fabrication, right? And it's fabricated by the money from these billionaires, pumped into the culture to drive this stuff aggressively into the culture. And using existing Marxists that are in place in our trade unions, in our middle management in the civil service, and using the NGO sector as basically the foot soldiers to bring this stuff everywhere. And now they want to get the indoctrination into the schools. So let me move on quickly because I know I'm probably running bad on time. Stakeholder capitalism, just going to talk about it briefly. Controlling corporations. So this is how they actually control the corporations and make the corporations invest in this stuff. It's called ESG. There's got a scoring system. So it's for the environment, for social, and for governance. So if a company has a bad score, they could find it hard to get credit, right? So that's how they control it. So one of the scores they have is the Corporate Equality Index, the CEI index. And the CEI index is run, that's why all these companies have rainbow flags during Pride Month, because it keeps their CEI score up. So they have to keep the score up, right? And it also, they have to fund various LGBTQ plus events. They have to have trans positive policies in the company, and they get scored against all those things. So this is why large corporations do all that stuff. It's not because they're into it necessarily. Some of them might be, or that they've got activists on board, but they have to do it to get a good score. And that score actually affects their credit rating. It's a scam. This is an outrageous scam. I sincerely hope Donald Trump tackles this, to be honest. So Corporate Equality Index, in the PDF that we give you, we'll give you a link. The Human Rights Campaign run this thing. You can see the criteria that they have, and it really is a scam. There's no doubt about it. So I need to talk about UNESCO, United Nations, transforming global governance and education. So this meeting took place at the United Nations on the 22nd of September last, and they signed up to this groundbreaking pact for the future to transform global governance. Now, most people didn't know that this took place. It wasn't covered in the media. Micheál Martin was there and he signed Ireland up to it. Okay? I don't think he talked to anybody, did he? I didn't hear any talk about this in the election. So we're all signed up to this pact for the future. So they've got these things called the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. And again, you look at this New World Order conspiracy theory as if nothing's happening, right? So if you go to Wikipedia, you see what they're doing here is to try to shut down the conversation. So somebody who doesn't know, they go up onto Wikipedia, oh, that New World Order things, that's rubbish. That cultural Marxism stuff, that's all conspiracy theories, far right, nothing to see here. That's basically it, right? So again, you can see Wikipedia are misrepresenting it. Let me go back here for a minute. Yeah, if you do a search on the UNESCO Digital Library, you'll find over 10,000 entries for critical theory. 10,000 entries. That's not surprising because UNESCO have always been like this. And now they've got leverage because they've got those wealthy people, those wealthy billionaires have been pumping in money through the World Economic Forum to drive this stuff aggressively. And that's what's happening. And so here we go. UNESCO, a new flagship report calls for reinventing education. You can imagine what that's all about. Reinventing education. We'll have a link to that document in the PDF. It's all about social justice, sustainable development, etc., etc. And remember, social justice includes the whole suite of things, right? It usually includes abortion, trans rights, the whole thing. It's a full course meal. These guys don't do a la carte. You've got to take the full meal of all this indoctrination. And that's what, so when you hear the term social justice, alarm bells should go off in your ears. And that's the document, reimagining our futures together, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And here we are. Ireland have got a document, and we've got a copy again on the table. Education for Sustainable Development, ESD. And again, this is, if you look at the background to this, they're teaching it using critical pedagogy. And again, it's pushing the whole notion of sustainable development. In 1984, the Ronald Reagan administration got out of UNESCO because of the extraneous politicization. They said it was unbelievable, an endemic hostility towards the institutions of a free society. That's because they're communists. We don't use the term anymore because you think people in suits at the United Nations aren't communists. They are. The current leader is. So I'm going to talk about collectivism because it's linked to communism, obviously, because it goes hand in hand. So collectivism is where you've got this collective group thinking. And we have this in Ireland today because everybody who watches the mainstream media has got groupthink, right? They all think the same, right? Speech is restricted because you can't say anything against the narrative, right? Loyalty to the collective. So your loyalty is to that collective, you know, that new family, right? Instead of loyalty to your faith or your own family or your country. And you can see that happening in our culture, right? It's no surprise. Power determines truth. Remember that? Moral relativism. The reality determines truth. That's what we think. And then the schools focus on indoctrination versus learning. And this is based on totalitarian rule, and Eddie is going to go through that, so we'll talk about that. This is serfdom versus freedom, okay? And they're trying to create a society that's on the left of this chart. That's the problem right now. So this, just to give you an idea, this guy was the Director General of the World Health Organization, right? The first Director General. And look what he says. Talks about to achieve world government is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family, traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. Is an out-and-out communist, right? So, and that's not isolated. I'd say the majority of leaders of these organizations would pretty well have the same belief system. This is what you're dealing with. So, ideological colonization, last section of this, transforming Irish education. This was a chart that was shown at the DCU SPHE course. It shows Ireland now as neoliberal, secular, and morally relativist. No right or wrong, okay? Moral relativism, so that's where we are in Ireland now, okay? And here we are, Dr. Jones Irwin of DCU, and he did a speech at one of the events working on the new curriculum. So it might be hard to read, but he talks about that the national curriculum should define the pertinent values to be fostered in students. So people like him are going to define the values that your children are going to hold. And then he adds, and that it's taught in ways that those also the values, the way it's taught, which is the pedagogy, teaching it through this Marxist critical lens. So he's basically telling you what he wants to see happen, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening. So I'll move on quickly. So this was our feedback on the NCCA primary curriculum. We said it was not fit to proceed as documented. We said that they need to step back from the education for social justice, woke agenda. It's a political indoctrination agenda, basically, going to the youngest people in our society and stealing their education from them, stealing a proper education. Because when you bring equity into education, it means lowering the standard. That's what it means. So this is the exact words that we get back to the NCCA, but it's not going to make any difference because they're not listening. They've got an agenda, and they're going to push through their agenda as much as they can. The only way we can get around this is putting political pressure on our TDs. They need to get it in the neck that we don't tolerate this, that we don't want to see our children indoctrinated and deprived of a proper education. And they can dress it up all they like, but we need to put pressure on them. So a little bit more to go. So what was the one in between? Oh yeah, this is the strategic plan from the NCCA, right? Their strategic plan. And they want to develop children as responsible, resilient, and compassionate actors for social justice, climate action, sustainability, and equality. They want to create social justice warriors out of every one of your children and have them out there with a communist flag, waving it, looking for trans rights or whatever it is. That's what they want. It's outrageous. And this is a book produced by DCU. 20 academics in DCU contributed to this book, Teaching Social Justice and Sustainable Development Across the Primary Curriculum. We've got a copy of the first chapter over there. I'll show you the table of contents and you'll laugh. See all the red stuff here? Critical historical inquiry for a socially just and sustainable world. And every single subject is being contaminated with social justice, sustainability, global citizenship. This is just a blatant, like, United Nations communist agenda. So that's the second half of it. You can just see all the red stuff. So we're nearly done, and we're going to play this video.
effective, comprehensive RSE must begin in early years, from as young as 3.